Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for attending our September 9th Improving Talk. We are thrilled you're spending some of your Friday with us today. Before we start, I want to inform you about a feature in the presentation that'll make the session more interactive. Please take note of the Q&A icon at the bottom of your window. Clicking that icon will open the question and answer feature, which allows you to send the moderator questions to be delivered to our insightful presenter at the appropriate time. Speaking of insightful presenters, I am proud to present Arturo Mosqueda, who is the delivery manager at Improving's Guadalajara office. Today, Arturo will be sharing an interactive discussion titled Software Development and Us, the way we have evolved together. The floor is all yours, Arturo.
Thank you very much, Shervin, and thank you, everyone. Good afternoon, and thanks for joining us today, for your time in this, what I hope is going to be a fun travel through time and the things that we have done in the past couple of years as software developers that have changed the way we live as humans as well. And as Shervin said earlier, we're going to talk about software development today, right? A little bit biased towards web development and JS because of something I'm going to share with you late in a moment, and how we have evolved together as a community and even as humankind with that, righty? So without further ado, let's actually get into what got us here, righty? So again, as I told you, this talk that we're having today is going to be more insightful than technical, right? I'm used to technical conversations. I actually like doing stuff and getting stuck demoing live in a conference, but today we're going to get more insightful than that, righty? I want us to go through the past couple of decades, actually. You're going to join me in a travel through time. We'll get to the rules of that game in a moment, but I want you to make a note down what you guys are used to doing today that we probably in your lifetime realize you weren't really that used to 10 years, 5 years, even 20 years ago, right? Some of that stuff is on the screen. You probably already have some of the stuff that you are used to doing today that you would not be able to live without it. And that was probably just available for us recently as humans, right? And I want to start the presentation with this thing here. I know you guys can't directly participate with me, but I hope that some of you know what this thing is, right? And this piece of probably old ruins or what seems like garbage is actually one of the first computers that we have discovered us as humans created. This was discovered probably 50 to 60 years ago, but only was relevant lately, right? Probably in the 80s or 90s when we actually took an X-ray picture of this piece of trash that we found on a record ship, right? I realized that this is an artifact from about 2,000 years ago, right? What we call today an orrery, or a handheld device that can tell us the position of the stars, the observable planets, right? The stuff that at that point in our human civilization was crucial to make decisions in general, right? What we'll say business decisions today, those were your business decisions earlier. When are we going to plant this type of seed? What are we going to do this type of things, right? And just to let you know, the fun thing, the fun fact about this artifact, the reason it surprised us as humans in an evolved and scientific civilization, is that 2,000 years ago, we thought humans didn't have the possibility of making gears as small as the ones contained in this device, right? A myriad of gears that really work perfectly to figure out where the stars that were observed back then, the 5 observable planets and most of the stars that were observed, positions and everything, right? We have been solving problems as humans for a while now, way before 2,000 years ago. But it's useful to know that we have done that, but it's also very easy to forget what got us where we are right now. We take too many things for granted probably today. And that's what this talk is about. I want you to come with me to casually time travel. I want you to close your eyes wherever you're watching this, if you feel comfortable, of course. And we're going to travel back to the 90s already. I just want to make a disclosure. If you're actually traveling to time, you should probably, when you come back to the current day, find professional help. This is all fake. This is just going to be a game. But let's start, right? The way we're going to travel to time, actually, let's try to remember any music that you can recall from those ages, alrighty? And before we make the first jump into the 90s, let's see what happened before. And of course, a lot of things happened before the 90s, right? We're not going to go back all the way back to the 50s. We're not going to go back all the way to John von Neumann, for instance, right? At the beginning of architecture and computers. We're not going to go back to the 70s or even the 60s, right? The first video games were created. the video game industry and how they have developed processes to solve them problems is also a very different talk that we can have some point in the future. But today we're going to start very, very early in the 90s, probably a few years back, right? Some of you might recall, some of you not. I wasn't born back then, right? I'm just talking about this because I read about it in a book. But back in 83, the January 1st of 1983, the internet was turned up as we knew it back then, right? As ARPANET. And a new protocol was introduced when it was turned on right after, the TCP/IP protocol. We actually moved the way we understood how to use the internet technology a lot, right? Because it helped us to introduce more features to it, more availability, more capabilities, and were available to us to solve problems, to implement things, to write blogs and catalogs and chat rooms, right? Something that also happened around like that time, around the end of 83, probably the beginning of 84. We lost a very important piece of technology that already had a lot of the things that we know today as software developers, such as recurrence, right, and concurrence, and even version control in an old Pascal system. But by the time that IBM decided to go to MS-DOS instead of using Pascal system, a lot of those features were lost. And eventually, through the past 20 decades, we have tried to rebuild them in the operating systems that we have and the context that we develop them. And finally, as last piece of context, so we can jump to the right point in time. Right before the 90s, Steve Jobs was let go of Apple, or was forced to resign from Apple, and started a computer company called Next, which were computers focused for advanced education and like advanced software work, right? So, you guys ready to the first jump to the 90s? Start playing whatever Michael Jackson song you have in mind, and let's go to the very beginning of 1990, where in an undisclosed location in the CERN, this individual, he wasn't a software developer back then, but Sir Tim Berners-Lee was playing with the Next computer, which had this very fun feature that let you extend any of the components that were used to build the operating system, and you could extend them to create your own tools, right? So this might sound like one of those stories that are hard to believe. I actually had to fact check this a couple of times. But he pretty much extended the text class into the first hypertext implementation, right? And he also created with that and with the tools that were provided in the Next computer, the first implementation of the World Wide Web, which is both the hypermedia initiative to make sure that we can access documents everywhere on the internet. And also it was the first editor. That's fun, right? It's confusing, but it was the first editor for the web. Right? This is actually the first web page that was created. It was written and displayed on that editor. It was a WYSIWYG editor. Anyway, thank you, Sir Tim Berners-Lee, for the World Wide Web. Moving a little bit forward, we got the first browser, right? And that might be like a menial happening in today's world where we have several browsers, like too many to pick around. But the first browser actually meant for the market that they have a place to put web pages on that made sense to sell things, right? To make money, to inform things. And actually, this was the first picture uploaded to the internet, and that was the first landing page, the landing page for the Beavis and Butthead movie by MTV. Fun, right? A very good usage of technology, I think. Now, in 94, and this might be nostalgic for many of us, Netscape Navigator is born, right? This was one of the first powerful browsers, and this was actually the first browser that introduced JavaScript. JavaScript has a very, very deep place in my heart. I will mention why in a moment. But JavaScript is born a few years later. What happened in 94 as well is the creation of SFTP. And again, this is one of those minor happenings that we probably don't pay much attention to. But the capability of your data being hidden, right, on the internet, being secure, or the promise of it being secure at least, actually triggered something important in the industry, righty? Before going to that point, we also had a lot of GIFs. If any of you identify which of these two GIFs was the first meme ever created, you get internet karma. But the next year happened, or brought some happenings that were very interesting to our industry today, right? Because the first complete process of Scrum was ran from beginning to end by Jeff Swartland and Ken. Thank you guys. And we could say we have JavaScript, right? It wasn't the JavaScript that we know today. We also had very solid version of Java back then, even though Java started back in 91. But some ecosystems released the first like solid version of what we know, like the Java that we know today, right? And also, along with 95, a bunch of other things happened. You remember that last year, 94 wrote SFTP, right? So with that information in mind, eBay, the first, sort of the first e-commerce platform on the internet, said, hey, we can sell things online. People are not going to be afraid to put their credit card information anymore, right? Hopefully, we are still today, but eBay is born, and with that marked the beginning of the era of market and e-commerce on the internet, right? The first product online was actually a broken laser pointer, fun fact. And of course, Microsoft brought Windows 95, which was an important breakthrough in operative system technology, especially user interface-based operative systems. Because before this, it was painful. It was fun, but it was painful. And also this brought Internet Explorer 4. It was the first version that actually supported a bunch of the fun things that we see today, like CSS, which was born a little bit later, styling, division in the content. You could actually be engaged with your content. So a few years later, this need of content on the internet, right? Creating mostly magazines on the internet and catalogs, and again, chat rooms, becomes an important thing, right? So more tools to solve the interface situation start popping up. Some of them are, of course, CSS, which are still today alive. And the other one is Flash. If you remember the story, you might be having a fun laugh right now. We'll talk about it in a few years on this presentation. Also, Google starts coming up, and it was just a little indexer page that you used to access other sites on the internet, right? Probably at the same level of Alta Vista back then. But anyway, HTML 3.2 brings this, right? Again, remember that this is a little bit biased towards web development, but the introduction of a means to separate content on the web also changed a lot of the things in how we developed back then, right? Because we no longer have textbooks from top to bottom or weird animations scripted here and there. We actually have separation of content. We could create user experiences through content placing pretty much, right? Again, we move forward a little bit to the end of the decade and Google is officially founded. We have our first actual browser of the internet that will read all of your data and gather all of your information. How fun was that back then? And by this time, just to put things in perspective, Netflix is still sending movies by mail, by physical mail, right? Mozilla is born. The Mozilla Foundation was born a few years before this, but Mozilla is born, which some kind of level sets the game for open source centers of people building technology, right? You could go to open source projects in Mozilla, actually help out on things that we're using today, browsers and everything. Good. And finally, at the very end of the decade, we start talking about blogging, right? People creating content, not like today with TikToks and YouTube videos and Twitch, but creating blog posts and becoming famous 5 minutes on the internet, sometimes way more than that. And the year 2K, does anyone remember that crisis? How scared was the world right before the turn of the century and millennia? You guys ready to go to the next millennia? Before jumping to the 2000s, let's do a quick recap, right? By the end of this decade, we have a couple of languages that are actually quite solid to build web products around, right? But the web products are mostly based in catalogs and content, right? Like information for someone else to consume. Online commerce is still in infancy because you have to go to the shop to buy things, right? You have to go to eBay to shop for stuff, and many people are still not confident sharing their payment information on the internet to strangers, right? Oh, something that's important here, back in the 80s and 70s, the way we built software was mostly the age of discovery, right? Everything was new. Every problem that we had to solve was new. So design patterns started forming back then. But by the end of the 90s, design patterns were already very embedded in the ADN of how we build software, even more so than today, probably, because we actually had to use the same language as community, right, to build things. We came from a crisis of software where we didn't have any standards, and everything that we built was custom built for that specific thing. So standardization was a big thing like that. Anyway, a bunch of mistakes happened, which of course led us to a bunch of learnings from that, which we'll see in the 2000s decade. But I just want to make sure that we know that at this point, we're mostly building catalogs and chat rooms, okay? let's move up to the 2000s. If you guys have a song in your mind that reminds you of the early 2000s, just play that on repeat. Britney Spears is a good reference for that. And let's talk about services and cloud, right? Woo! We went to the 2000s. Not everyone made it. Oof, that went dark for today's afternoon and a Friday. But whoever didn't go crazy in the 2000s, because there were many people doing that, many companies doing that, survived to see that RESTful APIs were started to being talked about. And that again changes the way we program everything, right? That we talk about software products on the internet completely. Because RESTful APIs, which were early adopted by eBay and MS and a little bit later by Flickr, which made picture sharing a thing, which led to a lot of social media and the socialization of the web. But starting up with RESTful APIs for shops made many people create websites for other people to buy products from them directly, right? Instead of going to eBay or creating a shop inside of the eBay platform, right? That type of thing. Anyone could create their e-commerce now. Just you have to know HTML, probably a little bit of JavaScript, and there you go, or CSS. Also, to make that easier, the cascading style sheet, the version closer to the one that we know today is created, right? We still didn't have a lot of things, but we did have media queries, which were important in a couple of years from this point. We also got Subversion back then. I don't know if anyone remembers Subversion. I always have a sour taste when I do, but we didn't have Git. Right? For anyone who's comfortable today doing a Git push to their code bases, today just remember we didn't have it back in the 2000s. 1 year goes by and this terrible thing happens, right? The 9/11 happens and the world again changes completely forever. We start thinking about security in every single layer of how we interact as humankind, right? We of course see a lot of security enhancements in airports, but also on how we develop software, right? How we secure data, how we can make the promise that your data is secure when we start using RESTful APIs, which will probably capture your information, right? Many policies and many audits start upgrading their policies from this point onwards, right? And this actually has a direct impact in today's day and age. We will get to that in 20 years in this presentation. Sweet. We also get some blogging platforms. Remember that blogging started at the end of the decade, but blogging platforms that actually use RESTful APIs that have a way more widespread usage start popping up, right? So anyone can write something, anyone can be famous, anyone can sell stuff online. And this is important because we weren't able to do this the decade before. Cool. And finally, 2004, the Flickr API, we can share pictures. Isn't that something that we do today as a species and we take for granted? Well, back then, we had to learn how to use an API, consume it, and actually do some stuff to share photographs, right? Again, Flickr makes an API to share photos free and public, and Facebook starts popping up exactly that year, right? It started up, of course, just in universities, and I want you to start noticing the pattern of these inventions standing on the shoulders of the giants that came before always, right? Facebook starts up just privately in some universities. They sign up kind of thing in the US. It didn't become a worldwide sensation until 2007, but it was already a big thing back in 2004, right? And around this time is where O'Reilly coins the term Web 2.0, right? Let's say that Web 1.0 was the original web. We build content, we write, we have written a lot of content for it. Web 2.0 is way more than just rounded buttons and gradients. It's actually the social web, right, that we live in today. The capability of sharing what you are coding, what you have wrote in your blog, what you are eating today or having for lunch, right? At every single moment with the world is what Web 2.0 was about, right? Also, it wasn't in the 2005 where Linus Torvalds totally upset with how version control happened before that, creates and releases Git for the development of the Linux kernel, and of course, for the improvement of all of the developers' quality of life after that. Thank you very much, Linus, for that. And 2006 shows us something again that changes the way we build software completely, which is the introduction of cloud services, right? Let's be very aware that before cloud services, we actually had to have physical servers, right? Either rent them in some place or buy them, build them, maintain them, configure them by ourselves. to have our applications and stuff up there in the internet, right? Served by some place that we can be certain will not fall down. But Amazon Web Services, even though they started introducing services a little bit by bit, years after, was a big thing, right? Because it meant that anyone who knew how to write an application could actually make their own business, their own company, their own startup, their own thing at any point in time without spending any time or money on actually buying a server, which is quite expensive and time consuming. Anyway, around this time as well, John Resig, the mystic John Resig, releases jQuery, right? Which again, talking about JavaScript, everyone has ever done JavaScript before, changed completely the way we write in the web, right? Because we start thinking about patterns. We start thinking about this language, which wasn't a language back then, which was just something to finger paint on the web with and add GIFs and add animations and add fun things to a thing that starts evolving into an easy to learn, very low level of requirements type of language that anyone can pick up and start creating things with. And jQuery just comes in to make it easier, right? To make it easier to pick up things and abstract the things that will make programming hard, or that make programming perceived as hard back then, and makes it available for more people to program, right? Alrighty, 2007. Again, another big thing happens. Steve Jobs comes in into the scenario and says, hey guys, I have this little device here where you can do all of the things that you could do in the past 16 days with the web that we've created, but in the palm of your hand, right? And that again changes everything for us, right? Even though it wasn't until a year after where they opened the App Store for applications from external developers, right? It was very, very strict, a strict process to push anything up there. It changes the way anyway that you think about business and making money if you're in that realm, right? Which aren't well, but it became another scenario for software developers and software development companies, of course, development products companies, to start attacking, to start trying to put their flag in. Facebook is released publicly around this time, right? Until it wasn't until 2008 they had an app on the iPhone, and of course, all of the focus of development starts shifting from creating content, right, and making sure that people visit my page so they can see an ad, make me money, and then move on to the actual site where they're going to buy things, to creating functionality, right? We start making our applications more complex since we have technology that enables us to do it. And by this time, it was around 2005 and up to 2007 that the agile process is actually adopted on the software industry. Not fully, but it starts getting adopted, right? We start hearing talks about Scrum, we start hearing talks about agile, right? More worldwide. A year after, Google doesn't want to fall out, and they release Android, right? Their own brand of mobile devices to compete with iPhone and BlackBerry, which was back then also, I think. You guys remember BlackBerry? Anyway, this happens, the Apple App Store opens up, and again, the market opens for many developers that want to earn some money or get a name for themselves on the application world up there, right? Many people do, actually. Do you remember Flappy Bird? Do you remember Farmville? Okay, Farmville was Facebook's. And from this point onwards, most of the industry start talking about the mobile world domination, right? We will have to be, at least on a minor part in the mobile scene, we have to have our app there. We have to be on the hands of everyone in the world. A year after, something again happens that changes completely how we think about JavaScript and how we think about how we write the web in general, which is Ryan Dahl, developer, creates this JavaScript platform. Well, actually, it's a C and C++ platform that runs JavaScript on anywhere pretty much, right? It can run it as a server-side application. You can embed it in an Arduino or a chipset, and actually right there, you can do a lot of stuff with it. Then again, it lowers the barriers, right, of what you need to have as prerequisite skill sets to actually add some value to the software industry. Because anyone who knew JavaScript will start learning probably a month or 2 or 3 about servers, right, and then create their own company, which happened back then. Another thing that happens here on 2009, it's Bitcoin. Oh, Bitcoin is so fun. Actually, a fun thing happens a few years later with Bitcoin. We're going to get there. And the ECMAScript standard number 5 also happens, which means the real relevance of this is JavaScript, which is embedded everywhere on the web. I don't think there's a single well, probably 98% of the web pages in the world have JavaScript in some way or another, right? Probably some of them already have WebAssembly or other things on it, but JavaScript is everywhere, right? So when people start talking about JavaScript as a language around this time, things also start moving. Because back then we only had Java or .NET, right? Probably Python was getting up there. Of course, we have C and C++ as languages that are viable for a market. Actually have a chance to play with COBOL for a time because that was a thing. But JavaScript becoming a language is something very interesting for me in terms of how we see the web, how we solve problems in the web. Because it's a tool that no one wanted to use. I never wanted to use it back when I did Java. And then it became this powerful thing that has a large community around it, making sure that it can work as a language, right? And we're still a bit far from that, but it's getting there. Anyway, you guys ready for another time jump to the next decade? Let's go to the commercial social web on the 2010 decade. And for this, I want you to channel the reggaeton song that you love or hate, because not everyone likes it. But I'm sure everyone knows at least one reggaeton song. Think about it, and let's talk about the framework revolution on the next part, right? And just as a quick recap, remember that at this point, we have an internet that is full of social sharing, right? It's full of content, like way more content than a single lifetime can actually watch and read, right? And we're starting to get to a point in terms of software development, in terms of how we build it and we write it every day, where the complexity of the things that we build is starting to surpass the tools and the processes that we have for it, right? It's starting to surpass our understanding of the tools that we use and how we use them so far to solve the problems that we've had up to this point, right? And again, these are new problems. We've never had a point in civilization, or we're not sure, but we never had it, I'm almost certain, where everyone was connected by a single device that you could hold in your hand, right? Anyway, let's go to the 2010 decade. We start with something fun. Apple killed Flash, right? Steve Jobs, and this of course represents the big share of the market that iPhone or that Apple in the mobile realm have, right? Steve Jobs pretty much said, guys, we cannot support obsolete technologies if they're going to hold us down, right? So I'm just not going to support Flash in my device. This starts another transformation in the industry, right? Back then, the big guys, the big names were Adobe, for instance, right? Amazon was starting to get there to the services, and there were a big shop already. eBay was a big thing back then in terms of technology, right? As soon as they adopted RESTful APIs, the whole industry moved to that. But in this point, Adobe was a big name, and it still is big, but it started losing a lot of market share because Flash was everywhere back then, right? And now you can barely use it in some like a specific and modded browsers to add it. You can, I guess, install the Java runtimes for it, but it's mostly dead a decade after, right? Just because the industry moved to mobile, right? And that's probably what's going to happen the next time we move from platform to another thing. Also, by this time, there's a little framework called AngularJS, which is born, and again, repeating the same iterations as before, standing in the shoulders of giants, right? What this does is pretty much lower the bar a little bit more of what do I need to know, right? Or how much years do I need to spend reading books to start creating my own applications, to start creating my own value on the internet, right? Also around this time, a couple of pizzas were bought with Bitcoin for what will be $20,000 today. Nice investment, guy. And responsiveness and responsive design becomes a thing. And again, it changes a little bit how we address the troubles of building a platform for users, right? We start thinking about that. We stop thinking about what we want to make and put out in the world, and start talking about what our customers would actually like to engage with, right? What our users will be using from our application that will differentiate us from the other 100 of applications that do the same thing in the market. And around this time as well, 2010, the first edition of Scrum, the Scrum Guide, is released. Right? We probably heard about Scrum a little bit earlier. Again, Jeff and Ken were busy trying to spread the word and making experiments around it. This is the first time where we have a guy that we can use to evangelize everyone with Scrum, right? Anyway, a year after Flash was dying, Adobe actually starts turning to mobile, and they acquire a company from which they created another framework called PhoneGap or Cordova, I think it was called Cordova. And that, again, lowers the bar for people who know JS, which pretty much can be learned by anyone, right? And if you have that, you can now create mobile applications. You don't need to learn C or Objective-C. You don't need to learn anything Swift was a thing back then. You don't need to learn Java, right, for Android. So now it's Kotlin what you need to learn. But that lowering of the bar opens the door to many more developers from different, right? For instance, the creator of Twitter is actually made maps, making maps, right? And he wanted to create a map just to see what everyone in the world was thinking about, was sending opinions on, right? He, I'm sure, wasn't expecting what it became, but he didn't have any web development background. Right? He pretty much picked up JavaScript. He picked up some of the things that were coming up then and created an amazing platform that Elon Musk is trying to buy for several millions of dollars. Anyway, moving on, we start talking about web components, right? This is important because what used to be just simple buttons and divs in the web, simple containers for content, actually become small applications by themselves, right? Every button, every little input, every even piece of text, right, has a lot of logic behind it, has some metadata behind it, so Google can actually read it as a piece of your page and bring good information about it to anyone who's searching for your type of product. It became more complex, right? That's what I'm trying to say here. And with that, of course, became more complex tools to help us solve that complexity or reduce the complexity, right? We start thinking about different ways of building the components that we have built for a decade now, more than a decade, almost 20 years, and start thinking about how we can react to users, right? How we can stop thinking like developers and creating our own products and start building products with the input of users. And also not just with the input of users. What if we make our applications just react what our users are trying to do in it, right? Hence, even though it didn't start in Facebook, the reactive architecture mindset, Flash.js, which became React.js eventually, brought a lot of the adoption and the reactive architectures that we know today, right? Like, let's build things that don't just do things. Let's build applications that service a user's need. And as soon as that user's need is requested, it does all the things that it needs to do to solve it, right? What else happens here? Around this time, Bootstrap is born, and after that, every single web page looks the same. And the concept of microservices is also brought into the industry, right? I remember a quote back from this year where it said, if you want your teams not to fight each other, just use microservices. Anyway, let's keep on moving on. We start seeing the appearance of many build tools, right? Remember that was simple web pages where we make divisions to separate content, starts becoming something that requires a building process, right? Requires pretty much compilation and compile time. I really miss compile time in Java, by the way, but it adds the complexity required and the tools required to do the job, and again, lower the complexity, right? That's what this is all about. TypeScript is born around this time, which tries to bring JavaScript to parity with other classical languages, which are way more powerful and secure and like memory safe, type safe, right? Especially like .NET or Java. The .NET team itself was involved in the creation of TypeScript, but what I'm getting here is, again, if you only knew JavaScript, you didn't have any engineering background, I'm saying, and picked up JavaScript at some point, you just pick up TypeScript, and now you can build world-class applications that are both type safe and a little bit memory safe, right? You have to do more stuff to make it memory safe than just a TypeScript, but makes it safer. And if we fast forward 10 years after to today's day, memory safety and type safety are probably the biggest things, the biggest topics in security of software development right now. Anyway, the build tools happen, React becomes open source, and the framework work begins, right? And what I like about this and bringing this to this table of how we do things in web, right? When 2 or 3 companies start competing by market share or by usage of their code, which is open source, by the way, they're not even licensing it, they're now earning money from it, right? They just want to earn market share of who is using our libraries or creations to create their own creations, right? A lot of things happen because they revolutionize the way they start thinking about building a framework and building applications, and the progress that creates. The one company is trying to the other one, and when trying to bring a new feature just to upgrade that, and everyone trying to become a party, create a progress in how we build things and the tooling that we have available for that we didn't see in the past 20 years happening in 3, right? Webpack and Angular 2 happen, which are two things that are widely used in today's world and age. Of course, we have had their iterations, and are probably 10 versions above this right now. And we also start thinking about atomic design and micro frontends, right? Which is, we totally shift our mindset from, we need to build this because I think this is the best idea and this is how I earn money, to what is my market telling me, right? What are our consumers telling us they need, so I can start giving them that. And this consumer mindset has a lot to do with how we build web today, right? All of the product information processes that we follow, all of the Scrum and scaled Scrum, scaled Agile process that we've seen in project and in our same organizations, have to do a lot with this change in the mindset, right? And not just having a think tank of what will be cool to build and sending all of our processes and information radiators outside to get empirical information and build product with, right? What Agile is about. Anyway, around this time, some Galaxy Note phones start exploding in some pockets. I hope no one in this call had that happen to them. It will suck. But something else that started happening here, right? Which is pretty cool. I don't think I introduced myself, by the way, but there's something cool. The JavaScript Foundation, the Node.js Foundation, which are part of the Linux foundations, gather into one big OpenJS foundation, which I'm part of, by the way. And these guys are mostly in charge of creating the certifications and training and the body of knowledge to make sure the decisions we take forward in the language and the open source community are going in the right way, right? And taking the right decisions and opinions into consideration. But anyway, we're getting to our day and age today. We're getting to 2020, right? We're already living in a digital society. We have democratized homes being hacked, by the way, from time to time. Why not? And we have K-pop and COVID as well. So let's talk about that. And I'm sorry for the flashbacks of the Facebook. 2020 saw the birth of the micro architectures in general, right? Since we've gotten to a point where all of the things that we build are quite complex, even though they might be quite simple, right? Even creating a button, if you want to write it very well, it may take at least a couple of tests to make sure it works. It may take a couple of documentation, probably in Storybeacon somewhere else, right? To make sure that we know which technical decisions drove us to get there. We're probably going to have to add some metadata and logging capabilities to make sure that we have observability and we know what's failing or not and what's happening when someone presses that button. And we also need a way to track what our users are behaving like in the application, right? If they are just spending a couple of seconds on top of the button and not clicking it, if they are clicking it repeatedly and causing errors on the page, that type of thing. So what came from just creating a simple markup button, right, that does something, it becomes its own application with its own complexity. So micro frontends try to solve this by actually stating it as it is, right? Every single component is an application. Let's track versions differently for them. Let's track changes for them differently. Let's release them differently, right? The cool thing that you can do with micro frontends is that you can just build your input, your registration form, and release it at its own product, right? And it will automatically show up on the pages after that has happened, which should streamline how we get things to production, right? Which is one of the things that we've been fighting for and creating processes for since the very beginning of software development. Two things that happened as well in 2021 and 2022, besides the continuing COVID pandemic, was a race in cybersecurity attacks, right? And I like to end on this note, right? Because most of this time I've told you how we have lowered the bar for many things, not JavaScript, not just JavaScript, right? And lowering the bar doesn't mean we have worse developers now. No, that's not the thing. We have worse controls to secure that we're building the things that we need, because our technology has become way more complex than how we understand it is from time to time, right? And what this means is the world has shifted this past couple of years into cybersecurity, right? And understanding observability, making sure that every single piece of my software is logging what it does to some place so I can check it, and making sure that all of our databases are encrypted. Oh my God, do you remember the Twitter thing where their passwords were just in plain text? Anyway, what I'm trying to get on with this is the world is changing as well. Probably everyone right now is working from home or was working from home at some point in the past 2 years. But that in the end didn't really affect how we built software, right? It did affect how we lived. It did affect probably a couple of things of the needs that became relevant into the market and the new products that were raised. We definitely had to change the cadence of our meetings, right? We definitely had to change how we interact with others at the office without being at the office. But the actual processes of pushing our code up there or reviewing whatever anyone else wrote, making sure that the features are well understood, making sure that the product is obtaining empirical data from the outside, right? Those type of things that we have created in the past 3 decades are still there, right? And if you haven't read this weird book called Odd Jobs, which was recommended to me by some senior developer earlier, it talks about the end of the world and how even then there are developers and people making the paperwork, right? I hope that we don't get to that point. But the thing is, those processes that we're building, this tooling that we have created, right? These findings that we have learned as a community, let's not forget them, guys, right? Because in the end, we as a software developing community, we are both building the train tracks as it goes, right? But also consuming what we have created with the train tracks. We are still leveraging what we did 20 or 30 years back. So having an understanding of what happened there and why we did that, right, can help us both use it better and also question it to create new things, to create better things, better processes, right? Today, we're looking at a world that's entering the Web 3.0 buzzword, right? Where O'Reilly's is starting to do that again. And Web 3.0 means decentralized mostly, right? What we saw on crypto and decentralized finances with Bitcoin, it started up as actually it's a proof of concept to decentralize anything that right now needs to be centralized. But sounds weird, right? But from voting for a new president, right, to sharing your data online on Facebook, both of those things can be decentralized, right? And that's what the market is trying to move forward. Not sure if that's going to happen the next year or the next decade or 20 years from now or never happens, but a couple of things are going there because we perceive the state of our current implementation of the architecture of our applications and an insecure state, right? On a state that needs improving. And that's why we are building tools, improving processes, and getting there. And that's what got us to today, right? I hope that you guys can take a couple of seconds or minutes after this call and think what you guys are doing today and onwards, right? To make sure that you are part of that history, that you are writing it the way you are already writing it in a passive way, but you have to make sure that you know we are writing this story every day, right? I just want to show you to wrap up full circle at the very beginning. We are seeing the Antikythera machine, right? This is a Lego reconstruction of it, right? Which is functioning almost 100% the same as that, right? And this is for me, and again, I'm a very, very big advocate of JavaScript, but I like to be real with it, right? This is what JavaScript looks to me right now, right? It's a language that enables anyone that is not Archimedes, for instance, right? We're not sure if this guy is Archimedes, but that didn't went through all of the studies and all of the required processes that were probably needed back then to build this amazing machine. This guy is actually a librarian to build this Antikythera machine. But you can build things, right? That's all of what I'm trying to say right now. We can build things. Do not limit yourself to the prerequisites that we think or that we have assumed for so many years that we have, right? And start creating, start innovating, start questioning what we're doing today, and if that's the best way to go. Alrighty. Oh, cool. So I think that wraps it up. Just to wrap up with it, do not forget history. We are certainly writing it every day with every library that we're using, every lunch and learn that we attend, right? Every talk that we are supporting, every community that we are supporting as well. So keep that in mind with everything you do today and onwards. And thank you very much. Any questions?
Yes, Arturo, we do have a question. Michael Perry asks, I had no idea you served in the Open JavaScript Initiative. What is the work that you're most proud of?
Okay, the work that I'm most proud of is sadly a work that hasn't been released yet, because back when Node, when we were just the JavaScript Foundation, when Node split, like the Node community split into IO.js and the Node.js community, we were trying to make sure they joined together. We were part of the team that talked with the leads of the open source community back then on IO.js to get to agreements, right? Something that I guess I do very well is mediate on things, right? Although I was not the only mediator and I was not the critical piece to make that happen, after like 6 months or 7 months of talking about parties and figuring out what they wanted to do, where their forks and products were moving forward, we actually helped them with agreements that led to the first, like the Node version 4.0.0, which was the first solid version, not in terms of the code base, but in terms of the community, which was very split back then. That's probably one of the things that I'm most proud of. The one of the products or the things that we created that I'm most proud of is the Node.js certification tracks. Because back in the day, we were basing ourselves a lot in how Java, like the Java community, already acquired by Oracle by then, were setting up their trainings, right? Which were very classical, very academic. And I think the way we set up the Node.js certifications actually doesn't make you a framework user for it, right? It actually goes through what would you need to do in any type of language or framework to create secure and solid and robust services in the backend, that type of thing. And the reason I'm proud of that is because people actually commented on it. Like when I create things and I don't get feedback, I feel a small rush of joy. But when someone tells me, even if it was like 2 or 3 people, that they got out something out of it, man, that fills me up so much. I hope that answers your question, Michael. Shervin.
Arturo, that was our only question.
Sweet. Alrighty. Then if you don't have any more questions, I would just like to leave you with pretty much the thought that's displayed on the screen. Really don't forget history, guys. We're still building that history that people are probably going to talk about in 200 years of how we created amazing things with technology and then we messed up society with it. Thank you very much and have an amazing Friday and weekend. And see you later.
Thank you all for attending today's Improving Talk. And Arturo, thank you for sharing the software development in us, the way we have evolved together. The recording of the session will be available the next business day. To view the recording, locate the session from Improving's virtual events page where you can register for future events. Have a wonderful weekend and remember to be kind to each other.